Hey guys. Tonight we slip quietly along the banks of the Nile, the air still and sweet with the scent of blooming lotus. The moon hangs low, casting silver over the ripples, and the stone walls of the palace gleam like wet marble. You can almost hear the slow lap of water against the royal barge, the hush of guards in gold-braided kilts, and somewhere in the distance, the whisper of a reed flute. You are not simply here to look, you are here to walk the same corridors where Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, mastered the art of turning private passions into public power. Her chambers breathe warmth, perfume curling in invisible tendrils, and silk drapes sway with the faintest breeze from the open balconies. It is beautiful, yes, but beneath it all, you can feel the tension of 1,000 eyes, politicians, generals, and rivals watching every move. You probably won't survive this if you make the wrong one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of her private world. Cleopatra's palace is not simply a building, it is a stage. Each corridor and courtyard designed to impress and disarm. The floor mosaics shimmer with colored stones depicting lotus blossoms and winding papyrus stalks. These are not idle decorations. They are reminders of fertility and rebirth, messages to all who pass through her realm. The air smells faintly of blue lotus, a flower thought to hold mild, intoxicating properties. Whether that was fact or ancient exaggeration is still debated, but here, the perfume mingles with the heat of oil lamps, lulling you into something that feels halfway between waking and dreaming. She moves through this space like a shadow touched by sunlight, her steps silent, her linen gown barely whispering against the polished floor. Historical records agree that Cleopatra's physical beauty alone was not the main force of her charm. It was her voice, her wit, her fluency in multiple languages. You sense it immediately. When she speaks, it is as if each word is crafted for you alone. There is no rush to her sentences. Every pause feels deliberate, a subtle invitation for you to lean closer, to want to hear the next phrase. Out on the balcony, the Nile glows under the moonlight. She often preferred to meet visitors here rather than in the more formal audience halls. It was informal enough to suggest intimacy, but still staged for effect. You imagine the quiet sounds of the city below the call of a night vendor, the distant creak of wooden wheels over cobblestone streets. These are the moments when she could make a political rival forget his suspicions, when she could ease a visiting emissary into conversation that slipped between poetry and trade negotiations. It's worth remembering that Egypt at this time was not just a country. It was a prize, a point of contention between the power of Rome and the pride of the Nile. The queen had to navigate every alliance with the skill of a tightrope walker above crocodile-infested waters. And yes, about those crocodiles there is an old tale that she once ordered the palace moat stocked with them, a mix of intimidation and exotic spectacle. Whether it happened exactly that way is something historians still argue over, but it certainly sounds like the kind of dramatic flair she might have employed. Inside, the scent shifts spices, perhaps cinnamon and myrrh, rising from braziers set along the walls. You catch glimpses of low couches draped in embroidered fabrics, ivory-handled fans resting beside silver goblets. These rooms are not empty. Attendants move quietly in the background, adjusting oil lamps, bringing trays of figs and pomegranates. Their eyes never meet yours for long, as if they've been trained not to interfere in whatever performance the queen is orchestrating tonight. Cleopatra is a master of pace. She does not greet you with overwhelming gestures. Instead, she lets the atmosphere do the first seduction. A breeze carries in the scent of the river. A servant offers a drink chilled with snow brought from distant mountains, a novelty in this heat. You feel the coolness in your hands, the delicate weight of the cup, and by the time you take your first sip, you've already surrendered a measure of your attention. There is, too, a sense of danger here, not the crude threat of soldiers, but the subtler peril of being understood too well. Cleopatra was known to read people swiftly. adjusting her words to their desires and fears. Ancient writers claimed she could shift from laughter to solemnity in a heartbeat, from playful banter to political strategy, without breaking the flow. You realize this makes her both unpredictable and utterly magnetic. In the corner, a small altar to Isis gleams with gold leaf. Offerings of incense curl upward, and in that moment, you sense the Queen's deliberate merging of personal identity with divine symbolism. She is not just a ruler, she is a living embodiment of Egypt's most sacred goddess. To stand here is to be inside a living myth, where every gesture might carry multiple meanings. You can't help but think of how stories about her have endured for centuries, twisted and embellished until truth and legend are inseparable. Somewhere deeper in the palace, a faint rhythm of drums begins. It is slow, almost like a heartbeat, and you suspect it's no accident that it starts now. The air feels heavier, the shadows warmer, and even the moonlight through the open arches seems to lean in toward you. In this space, under her gaze, you realize that Cleopatra's strangest and most potent practice might not have been any single ritual or seduction. It is the way she turns the entire environment into a living, breathing extension of herself, an unbroken thread of influence that you are already tangled in. You notice it first in the faint shimmer along the folds of her gown, the way the fabric moves as though it carries its own light. Cleopatra has not chosen her perfume for you by chance. No one in her presence ever breathes in the same scent twice. Tonight it is a layered haze of frankincense, cinnamon, and the faint sweetness of blue lotus, a fragrance that lingers in your mind even before it clings to your clothes. Ancient accounts agree she was a master of aromatics, and some even say she commanded a private workshop where perfumers experimented with rare oils brought by caravans from Arabia and India. Whether she personally crafted each blend is something historians still argue over, but it is certain she understood how smell could disarm the cautious and loosen the guarded. You watch as a servant glides by with a shallow bowl of oil, its surface glittering in the lamplight. Cleopatra dips 2 fingers into the golden liquid and rubs it along the inside of her wrists, the pulse points, where the warmth of the skin sends the fragrance upward. It is an unspoken invitation: come closer if you dare. Perfume here is not merely a cosmetic, it is a statement of territory, a declaration that even the air belongs to her. You remember how, in this palace, the perfume is never static. The scent shifts as you move, guiding you like an unseen hand deeper into her world. The Greeks and Romans often mocked the Egyptian love for heavy perfumes, claiming it was decadent. You can almost hear Cleopatra laughing at their hypocrisy, knowing that when they dined with her, they themselves leaned closer to inhale. Tonight, her choice of fragrance has a sharp undercurrent beneath the sweetness, something like resin or cedar, steady, grounding, a reminder that she is not only seduction but structure, a pillar that holds the room. She speaks in a low voice, and it seems to curl around the scent, as if the two are working in tandem. The words are casual, almost conversational, yet the pauses are long enough for your thoughts to wander. In those spaces, the perfume fills the gaps, and you begin to realize the strategy: your senses are never without her. Even when she is silent, she is present. There's a quirky little story that floats through the corridors, whispered by servants who claim they once saw her testing perfumes on the sails of her royal barge. Supposedly, she had them drenched in a particular blend so that when she sailed upriver to meet a dignitary, the wind itself would carry her arrival ahead of her. It sounds absurd. How could anyone scent the air over an entire river? Yet the Romans later wrote of encountering the aroma of her ship before they even saw its painted prow. Whether this was embellishment or reality remains uncertain, but it would fit perfectly with the Queen's taste for spectacle. A tray arrives with small alabaster jars, their lids sealed with wax. Cleopatra gestures for you to choose one. The container is cool in your hands, and when you break the seal, the fragrance rises like a captive spirit freed. This one smells faintly of roses, though richer and darker, almost wine-like. You think about how roses do not grow easily in Egypt's dry climate, and you realize this jar must have been an import from far-off lands, a gift perhaps, or a trade acquired through her careful negotiations. She watches you as you inhale, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion but in assessment, as though your reaction is part of a private experiment. Perfume here is not just about attraction, it is a political tool. The queen knows that certain scents are associated with deities, with festivals, with moments of triumph or mourning. To wear them at the right time can evoke memories, loyalties, even fears. You begin to understand that when she meets a general, she might wear the resin used in temple offerings, aligning herself with the gods. When she receives a Roman envoy, she might choose something exotic, signaling that Egypt is a land of endless resources and luxuries. There is a moment when the air seems to shift entirely. A stronger breeze sweeps in from the balcony, and with it, the scent sharpens, carrying the bite of citrus peel. You look around, wondering if a lamp has burned too hot, but then you see her smile. She knows exactly what has happened. Somewhere outside, an attendant has just crushed fresh citrus in the courtyard, and the wind has delivered it right on cue. Nothing here is accidental. One scholar centuries later would write that Cleopatra treated fragrance as an extension of conversation. If her words planted the seed of an idea, the perfume was the water that made it grow. It is a poetic thought, but as you stand here, you realize it might be more literal than it sounds. You're already associating the scent with her presence, the warmth of the room, the particular slant of moonlight across her shoulder. Long after you leave, those scents will haunt you, returning without warning, pulling you back to this night. She leans closer now, and the combined aroma of oils, her own skin, and the faint trace of wine on her breath is overwhelming without being cloying. It is balance, and balance requires intent. You catch yourself inhaling deeper, not for the air, but for her. And in that instant, you know she has won this round, not by touch, not by promise, but by the invisible claim she has staked in the very air between you. The chamber beyond the antechamber is warm with steam, though no fire is visible. You step through a veiled archway and find yourself in a space that glows with amber lamplight bouncing off the surface of still, pale water. Cleopatra's bathing rituals are whispered about in half a dozen languages, and here you are, inhaling the humid air scented faintly of almond and honey. The stone pool is lined with alabaster, its edges inlaid with tiny tiles that sparkle faintly like captured starlight. The surface ripples only when a servant dips a bronze ladle to add more of the warm, sweet mixture. Historical accounts agree that Cleopatra bathed not only in water but in milk, most likely donkey's milk, blended with honey and a hint of saffron. The combination was believed to soften skin, keep it youthful, and carry a subtle fragrance long after she stepped out. Whether the precise formula was hers or inherited from earlier queens is something historians still argue over, but it is certain that this was no ordinary soak. It was an elaborate performance, part private indulgence, part public statement, even if the audience was carefully chosen. You see how it works. The light, the steam, the scent, they do not just cleanse, they envelope. The bath becomes a stage where the queen controls every sensory element. Even the sound is part of the design. The slow drip from a carved spout shaped like a lotus stem, the gentle swish of water as she moves. You realize that to be invited into this space is already to be considered important, yet it is also a test. Will you keep your focus, or will the haze of warmth make you pliant? There's a quirky detail passed down from a palace servant's tale, whether true or not, that Cleopatra once insisted the milk for her bath be delivered before dawn in clay jars kept on ice. The idea of a queen with a standing order for fresh donkey milk might sound absurd, but in an age without refrigeration, it meant organizing entire teams of handlers, animals, and transport. Just thinking about it makes you aware of the scale of resources she commanded for even the most intimate rituals. You can see why such baths became the subject of gossip in Rome. There, senators imagined her surrounded by servants with golden ladles, gilded towels, and scented oils poured over her hair. They mocked her for decadence, while secretly envying the power such scenes projected. The truth is likely more nuanced. Ritual bathing was as much about religion as beauty. In Egyptian culture, purity of body was linked to spiritual readiness. Here, she could emerge not only physically renewed but symbolically cleansed, ready to appear as the living Isis. She steps down into the water, and the faint ripples carry the milk's sheen toward you. The scent is heavier now, sweet, but with a grounding note of earth from the saffron threads that float lazily on the surface. You're aware that the warmth is seeping into your own skin, softening your guard. The queen moves slowly, almost as if she's pacing the moment, letting time itself thicken like the steam around you. From somewhere above, a servant pours a thin stream of rosewater, which hits the surface with a faint hiss before spreading into the milk in pale pink swirls. Cleopatra tilts her head slightly, letting the liquid run through her hair. You think about how much of this is functional and how much is theatre. Perhaps that distinction doesn't matter. In this room, function and spectacle are the same thing. She begins speaking, her voice echoing gently off the domed ceiling. The words are light at first, a passing comment about the Nile's floods, a mention of the merchants arriving from Phoenicia, but underneath, there are small hooks. She is gauging your responses, testing the current between you. You answer without thinking, lulled by the warmth and her unhurried cadence. The scent, the temperature, the sound of the water, all of it narrows your focus until you realize you've forgotten the political weight you carried into this meeting. One Roman chronicler once claimed that Cleopatra would sometimes summon political envoys to meet her after such a bath, her skin still dewy, her hair scented and loose, so that they would see her at her most luminous. Whether that detail was slander or truth is impossible to prove, but you understand why it stuck in their memory. In this setting, her presence is both intimate and overwhelming. A sudden movement catches your attention. A servant places a small alabaster bowl near the edge of the bath, filled with crushed petals and something darker, maybe myrrh. Cleopatra dips her fingers in, rubs the mixture along her collarbone, and the fragrance blooms through the steam. The effect is instantaneous. You lean forward without realizing it. She meets your gaze briefly, and in that moment, you feel the subtle shift she has drawn you in closer, without ever asking you to step forward. When she finally rises from the bath, attendants wrap her in fine linen, the kind so sheer it seems more like mist than fabric. You realize this was the endgame all along, not simply to bathe, but to transform, to emerge, altered in your eyes. And you, caught in the warmth and scent and the faint shimmer of her skin, cannot say when exactly you stopped thinking like a guest and started feeling like a participant in something far older and far more deliberate. The air shifts as you leave the steamy warmth of the bath chamber and follow her into a hall awash with the glow of 100 oil lamps. Here the ceilings rise high, painted with deep lapis blue and dotted with golden stars, as if the night sky itself has been brought indoors. Long tables are laid with silver platters, heaped with pomegranates split open to reveal glistening seeds, roasted quail glazed in honey, figs still warm from the sun. The scent is intoxicating, sweet and savory, layered with the faint sharpness of wine, vinegar, and herbs. This is no ordinary meal. This is one of Cleopatra's silver-tongued banquets, where every bite is served with a side of strategy. The room is alive with sound, soft music from hidden corners, the low hum of voices, the occasional peal of laughter that might be genuine or might be staged. Cleopatra sits not at the head of the table but at its center, making it impossible for any guest to feel too far from her or too close without invitation. It is a position of subtle dominance, and you can feel the gravitational pull of her presence. Historical accounts tell of her legendary ability to turn a feast into a negotiation, slipping between flattery, playful challenge, and measured provocation without missing a sip of wine. Whether it was in Alexandria or aboard her gilded barge on the Nile, the Queen used banquets as stages for deals that would ripple across continents. Historians still argue whether some of the more outrageous tales the pearl dissolved in vinegar, for instance, were literal acts or carefully planted myths, but the effect was the same, to leave her guests talking about her long after the plates were cleared. Tonight, you notice how she works the room. She begins with light conversation, commenting on the texture of imported olives, the quality of a musician's performance before turning her attention to a guest's political ambitions. Her laughter is soft, but her eyes are sharp, and every guest here knows that their words may be remembered far longer than the taste of the food. A quirky story drifts through your mind, one you once heard from a merchant who claimed to have served at such a banquet. He swore that Cleopatra once had her wine infused with crushed petals from a flower that only bloomed under moonlight, saying it made the drink kiss the tongue before it kissed the mind. Whether or not the flower existed, the image is pure Cleopatra, half poetry, half weapon. Servants pour dark red wine into goblets of beaten gold. You notice that the queen's own cup is smaller than most, and that she sips far less often than her guests. It's a reminder that in this game she must remain sharp, while others grow hazy. The more her guests relax, the more they reveal, their tongues loosened by drink and flattery. The courses unfold like a script. First, dishes meant to impress exotic fruits, rare spices. Then, foods with sensual textures, creamy cheeses, honey-drizzled pastries. Finally, the slow, heavy meats that sink into the body, paired with thicker, sweeter wines. By the time the final platter arrives, the guests are leaning toward her as though she holds the very air they breathe. You watch her draw a Roman envoy into a discussion about trade routes, using a compliment on the flavor of the lamb as an opening to discuss taxation. She lets the conversation drift toward the Nile's grain, then toward the political unrest in distant provinces. It is as if the meal itself is carrying the discussion, each bite leading to the next subject. And then there's her voice, low, unhurried, with a rhythm that seems to match the music in the background. You realize that the banquet is not simply about feeding the body, but orchestrating the senses. The taste of saffron, the sight of her in shimmering linen, the sound of her laughter, the faint scent of her perfume cutting through the heavier aromas of roasted meat. The guests are not fools. They know she is steering them, but they are willing to be steered, because the journey feels less like manipulation and more like surrender to a tide they secretly hope to ride. You feel it too, the sense that to refuse her tempo would be to step out of the music entirely. As the night deepens, the musicians play slower, the lamps burn lower, and the room seems to draw in around her. She leans back slightly, her eyes scanning the table, noting who lingers over their drink, who whispers to a neighbor, who is watching her with calculation. Every detail matters. When the final toast comes, it is not to victory or conquest, but to the sweetness of shared company. The words are soft, the meaning layered. Each guest will leave believing they have shared a moment of rare intimacy with the queen, and yet, in truth, she has shared only what she wished them to see. By the time you rise from the table, the memory of flavors is tangled with the memory of her voice. The banquet has fed you, yes, but more importantly, it has marked you. You are now part of her story, whether you intended to be or not. The banquet hall empties slowly, its golden plates and silver goblets whisked away by silent attendants. You follow Cleopatra down a narrower corridor where the light softens and the air grows cooler. Ahead, a pair of carved cedar doors swing open to reveal a space unlike any you've seen, a chamber alive with movement, though the creatures inside make no sound at all. Here is where the queen keeps her collection of sacred animals, and here is where symbolism and seduction begin to blur. The room smells faintly of papyrus and sandalwood, with an undercurrent of something wilder, animal musk, warm and faintly sweet. Along one wall, a shallow pool glistens in the lamplight, its surface broken occasionally by the ripple of a turtle's head or the flick of a fish's tail. In the center of the space, a low platform is draped in embroidered linen, upon which lounges a sleek black cat with gold rings around its neck. The cat's yellow eyes follow you as if it already knows more about you than you'd like. In Egyptian tradition, animals are not merely pets. They are living embodiments of gods. Cats are sacred to Bastet, the goddess of protection, fertility, and pleasure. Falcons belong to Horus, the sky god. Even crocodiles, fearsome and silent, are linked to Sobek, the god of the Nile's strength and unpredictability. Cleopatra knows this better than anyone. By surrounding herself with these creatures during certain audiences, she wraps herself in layers of meaning. Every glance from the cat, every soft flutter of a falcon's wing, becomes part of the performance. Historical records note that she sometimes received visitors with a tame falcon perched on her arm, letting its sharp eyes rest on the guest before hers did. The implication was clear. She saw everything, and nothing escaped her. Historians still argue whether she kept an actual crocodile in a palace courtyard pond, or whether this was Roman propaganda meant to paint her as dangerous and exotic. But it's the kind of rumor she would not have bothered to deny. It served her image either way. A quirky palace story claims that Cleopatra once staged a private dinner with an Alexandrian nobleman in a courtyard where trained ibises, tall, elegant birds, wandered freely between the tables. Whenever the conversation faltered, she would toss a morsel to one, watching it snatch the food with precision. The guest later told others he felt as though he were being measured just as carefully. Whether it happened or not, you can see the wisdom in such theatrics. Tonight, she moves among the animals like one of them, her steps slow and fluid, her hands trailing over feathers and fur as she passes. When she pauses beside a small leopard cub, its spotted coat rippling under her touch, you can't help but see the parallel, the same poised unpredictability, the same sense that she could be playful or lethal at a moment's notice. She invites you to sit on a low cushion near the pool. A servant brings a shallow dish of water scented with mint leaves, offering it for your hands. The act feels ceremonial, though no explanation is given. Across from you, the black cat curls into her lap, its purr audible in the quiet. She speaks softly, asking about trade ships, political unrest, distant provinces, but her hand never stops stroking the cat's sleek fur. The message is unspoken but unmistakable. In this room, she is both the priestess and the predator. You start to realize the depth of the strategy here. By tying herself so closely to animals with sacred associations, Cleopatra blurs the line between mortal woman and divine symbol. If she is Bastet, she is pleasure and protection. If she is Horus, she is vision and vengeance. If she is Sobek, she is the river's bounty and its danger. A man may refuse a queen's request, but who dares defy a living goddess? A falcon shifts on its perch above you, feathers rustling like distant thunder. Cleopatra glances up at it and smiles faintly, as though it has just confirmed something she suspected. You feel the hairs on your neck rise, though you can't say why. Perhaps it's the weight of centuries of belief pressing into the moment, or perhaps it's just her ability to make you feel as though the entire world is watching you through animal eyes. When you finally leave the chamber, the scents and sounds cling to you, the musk, the soft pad of paws, the ripple of water. You find yourself glancing back once, half expecting the black cat to follow. But it stays where it is, eyes glowing faintly in the lamplight, as if to remind you that in Cleopatra's presence, you are never entirely out of her sight. The next chamber feels like stepping into a jeweler's dream and an alchemist's workshop at the same time. The air is thick with the faint tang of ground minerals, crushed petals, and something sharper, perhaps powdered malachite. Here, Cleopatra's exotic cosmetics are arranged on low tables of polished ebony, each surface scattered with small jars, bronze applicators, and mirrors framed in ivory. The light is deliberately soft, filtered through thin linen, so that the gold in her skin glows and every pigment looks richer. Historical sources agree that the queen's makeup was more than vanity. It was armor, medicine, and coded language all at once. Egyptian Kohl, made from galena or malachite, was believed to protect against the desert sun's glare and even ward off eye infections. Whether it truly had medicinal effects or simply the benefit of shade is something historians still argue over, but the result was undeniable, a striking gaze that could hold a room. You watch as she leans toward a polished bronze mirror, her attendants working with the precision of surgeons. One grinds bright red ochre into fine powder, mixing it with animal fat to create a lip stain. Another blends crushed carmine beetles with beeswax for a hue so deep it looks almost forbidden. The colors themselves are rare, gathered from trade routes that span deserts and seas. Some pigments are worth more than silver, and here they are, being brushed onto the queen's eyelids without hesitation. A quirky court rumor says Cleopatra once had her cosmetics laced with tiny flecks of gold, not enough to be gaudy, but enough to catch light subtly when she moved. The idea was that anyone speaking to her would see that glint without fully realizing it, like a secret only their eyes could catch. True or not, you find yourself watching her closely now, wondering if that warm gleam on her skin is the lamp or something more deliberate. She gestures toward a small alabaster jar, and an attendant offers it to you. Inside is a paste of myrrh and resin, sharp and sweet at once. She explains that it is rubbed along the hairline and wrists to create a halo of scent and sheen. The words are casual, but her eyes stay on you as you breathe it in, as if gauging your reaction is part of the lesson. Cleopatra's skill lies in how she uses cosmetics as conversation without speaking. The choice of a deep blue eyelid can signal loyalty to Isis. A green tint might whisper of rebirth and renewal. The glossy black lines extending from the corners of her eyes are not just dramatic, they elongate her gaze, giving the impression that she sees farther, wider, deeper than anyone else. You begin to suspect that every brushstroke is aimed as precisely as an arrow. The act of applying the cosmetics is its own performance. She does not rush. The brushes and sticks are moved with ritual precision, as though this is a private rite you've been allowed to witness. And perhaps that's the point, to make you feel as though you've been invited into the inner sanctum, while in truth you are simply another audience member in an ongoing show. From the balcony beyond, a sliver of late afternoon light falls across her face. You see how the pigments transform in that beam, shifting subtly as she tilts her head. It's not magic, but it might as well be. Even the wind seems to hesitate before it moves her hair, as though it, too, has been drawn into her gravity. She speaks now of Roman fashion, comparing it to Egyptian taste, pointing out where simplicity works and where it fails. You realize she is not just talking about clothing, she's talking about presentation, about knowing exactly what to reveal and what to enhance. Her tone is light, but her words carry the weight of strategy. When the final touch is applied, a dusting of fine-ground lapis over her lids, she turns to you fully. The transformation is complete, but not in the way you expected. She is not hiding behind the pigments. She is using them to sharpen every line of herself, to focus the gaze exactly where she wants it. You can feel the shift in the room. The attendants step back. The light seems warmer, and you understand now that the strange power in Cleopatra's beauty has little to do with nature and everything to do with choice. Every jar, every pigment, every scent is another string in the web she spins, and you, willingly or not, are caught in it. The perfume and pigments still linger in the air when she leads you through a narrow side passage, its walls painted with faint hieroglyphs of hawks, lotus blossoms, and coiling serpents. The light here is dimmer, the temperature cooler, and the faint echo of footsteps tells you this is not a public part of the palace. At the end of the passage, a carved wooden screen swings open, revealing a modest room with low couches and simple woven mats, nothing like the opulence you've just left. This is not a place for display. This is a listening post. Here is where Cleopatra's royal bedroom spies begin their work. You notice them immediately, though they blend into the background: servants pouring wine, attendants folding linen, a musician quietly tuning a lyre. None of them meet your eyes for long, and yet you have the distinct impression they are memorizing every detail about you: your clothing, your posture, even the way you breathe. Historical accounts hint that Cleopatra maintained an intricate network of informants, many of whom were embedded in her own private spaces. Whether they acted entirely on her orders or simply brought her the whispers they overheard is something historians still argue over, but the result was the same: few words spoken in her presence ever truly left her. You settle onto a low couch, and a servant offers you a small dish of dates and almonds. It seems harmless enough, but you notice how the offering gives them an excuse to linger near you, to gauge your reaction, to catch any stray comment. Even silence is studied here. A quirky tale from a Greek merchant tells of how Cleopatra once used a handmaid's report about a visiting dignitary's fear of snakes to stage a harmless but unnerving encounter, a carved serpent accidentally placed in the guests' chambers, followed by a reassuring appearance from the queen herself. The man, grateful for her protection, later agreed to terms that favored Egypt. Whether this was fact or embellishment hardly matters. It fits perfectly with the subtle precision you're seeing now. The room is arranged to encourage comfort. Cushions are soft, wine is warm and spiced, and the air is faintly perfumed. This is calculated, relaxed, people talk more freely, and talking freely is exactly what these attendants are here for. They may look like background figures, but you sense that later tonight, each one will carry fragments of conversation back to the queen, who will weave them into a clearer picture of her guests' intentions. Cleopatra herself seems at ease here, speaking casually about trivial matters. A market festival, the quality of figs from a certain grove, but you can tell she is listening closely, perhaps more closely than she speaks. Every nod, every smile is a form of encouragement for you to share more. And when you do, you're rewarded with a small story from her own life, offered just intimately enough to feel personal, but not so revealing as to weaken her position. From somewhere beyond the screen, you hear faint laughter, then the muffled sound of sandals on stone. Another group is arriving, and you realize that the queen will repeat this entire dance with them, adjusting her tone and posture to fit their weaknesses. This is not coincidence, it is a system. The musician in the corner begins to play softly, the sound filling any pauses in conversation. It makes your voice feel less exposed, less risky, which is exactly the point. People will say more if they believe no one is paying close attention, and in this room, that illusion is as carefully crafted as the queen's cosmetics. You recall a Roman historian's claim that Cleopatra never entered a negotiation without knowing at least one personal detail about her counterpart. It might be a fondness for a certain wine, a superstition about a colour, or a grudge against a rival. That knowledge, whether gleaned from servants or staged encounters, became her silent advantage. By the time you leave the chamber, you realize you've shared more than you intended. Not secrets, exactly, but small truths that could be strung together into something useful. The servants bow politely, their faces serene, their eyes unreadable. You understand now that in Cleopatra's palace, the walls do not just have ears, they have memories, and those memories belong entirely to her. The corridor from the listening room curves gently until it opens into a suite that makes you pause mid-step. Cleopatra's private chambers are nothing like the public halls. Here, the walls are clad in panels of veined marble that catch the lamplight like liquid stone, streaks of gold and green running through white so pure it almost glows. The floor beneath your sandals is cool, inlaid with mosaics of lotus flowers, ankhs, and winding papyrus stems that seem to grow toward the bed at the center of the room. The bed itself is raised on a low platform of carved ebony, its frame draped in sheets of imported linen, so fine you can see your hand through them. Pillows stuffed with goose down spill over the edges, and a coverlet of deep crimson is folded at the foot, ready to be drawn over the queen should the night turn cool. This is not simply a place to sleep, it is a theatre set, every detail arranged to project both intimacy and power. Ancient sources note that Cleopatra's bedroom was as much a diplomatic space as her audience hall. She could receive envoys here under the guise of informal conversation, trading the stiff posture of the throne room for the soft, inviting atmosphere of a private chamber. Historians still argue whether these encounters always carried romantic undertones, or whether the queen simply knew that a relaxed guest was an easier guest to persuade. You notice how the décor balances the sensual with the symbolic. At the head of the bed, a low altar to Isis holds a bronze lamp shaped like a lotus, its flame steady in the still air. Around it, small bowls of rose petals and blue lotus flowers release a gentle perfume. At the far wall, a mural depicts the goddess Hathor offering an ankh to the pharaoh, an image of divine blessing that no visitor could miss. A quirky palace anecdote comes to mind. It's said that Cleopatra once had a hidden copper tube installed behind the headboard, allowing warm air from the palace baths to drift into the room on cool nights. Some claimed it was an indulgence. Others whispered it was to keep guests comfortable enough to linger. True or not, the idea fits with the meticulous control over environment you see here. Servants move quietly at the edges of the room, adjusting the height of oil lamps, scattering fresh petals onto the floor, and placing small bowls of figs and dates within easy reach. None speak unless spoken to. The silence has weight, broken only by the faint rustle of linen and the occasional splash of water from a small fountain set into the wall. Cleopatra gestures for you to sit on a cushioned bench at the foot of the bed. The vantage point is deliberate. You can see the entire room from here, and more importantly, you can see her in it. When she sits across from you, her posture is relaxed but purposeful, her hands resting lightly in her lap. The room itself seems to settle around her, the way a frame settles around a painting. You start to realize that even the choice of materials is calculated. Marble and gold speak of wealth. Imported fabrics suggest far-reaching influence. The subtle fragrance of Lotus speaks of sacred legitimacy. It's not a jumble of luxury for its own sake. It's a coded statement to anyone allowed inside. This is Egypt's power, distilled into a single space. As she begins to speak, her voice is lower than before, carrying easily in the still air. She asks about your travels, the state of your homeland, the rumors along the trade routes. The questions seem casual, but you can feel the threads being drawn together. You answer, perhaps more openly than you would have in a formal hall, lulled by the comfort of the room and the softness of her gaze. In the far corner, a bronze brazier burns with a slow, fragrant smoke. It's a blend you can't quite place. Something floral, something resinous, something that makes your limbs feel just slightly heavier. Whether it's intentional or simply a pleasant background scent, you can't say. But it works. By the time she rises, the conversation has touched on politics, poetry, and the quality of Alexandrian wine. You stand too, and she steps closer, not enough to touch, but enough that you feel the faint shift in air between you. The room holds the moment like a secret, and you know it will keep it, as it has kept so many before. The door from her private chamber opens into a narrower gallery lined with tall niches, each holding a different instrument, lutes with curved necks, lyres strung with gut and gold, slender flutes carved from ivory. The air hums faintly here, not from voices but from the distant echo of rhythm. Cleopatra leads you toward a low-lit room beyond, where the scent of incense is joined by something warmer, the faint resinous tang of polished wood and the animal hide stretched taut over drums. This is where music does its real work. You've heard the stories how Cleopatra could orchestrate entire negotiations with a carefully chosen melody in the background. Ancient accounts say she employed musicians who understood not just performance, but timing. When to swell the sound to fill a silence, when to let a single note linger so the mind would wander exactly where she wanted it. Whether these accounts were exaggerated by awestruck guests is something historians still argue over, but in this space you feel the truth in the precision. 3 musicians sit cross-legged on a woven mat, one plucking a deep-toned lyre, another coaxing breathy phrases from a reed flute, and the third keeping a heartbeat rhythm on a goblet drum. Their eyes are lowered, but their ears are everywhere. The tempo is slow, hypnotic, each beat settling into you like a foot sinking into warm sand. A quirky palace anecdote claims Cleopatra once had an entire evening's music tuned to the pulse of a particular guest. Servants, so the tale goes, measured the man's heartbeat discreetly during his arrival, and the musicians adjusted their playing until it matched. The guest, perhaps unconsciously, found himself leaning toward her with every phrase, as if the room itself understood him. True or not, it's exactly the sort of detail you could imagine her arranging. You sit on a low cushion while a servant pours you a small cup of spiced wine. The cup is warm in your hands, and as you take a sip, the notes of the lyre seem to rise just slightly, like the music is following your breath. Cleopatra settles beside you, close enough that you can feel the subtle shift in the air when she moves. She says nothing for a moment she doesn't need to. The music is already speaking. The melodies weave in and out of your thoughts, mingling with the soft lamplight and the lingering fragrance from her chambers. It's impossible to tell where one sensation ends and another begins. You realize that this is the point. The music is not a background. It's a net, binding every detail together so that your focus never drifts far from her. She begins to talk, her voice almost in sync with the rhythm, each sentence sliding neatly into the space between beats. She asks questions about trade ports, about the stability of Rome's eastern provinces, but it feels more like a shared musing than an interrogation. You find yourself answering easily, lulled by the interplay of sound and scent. One of the musicians changes pace just slightly and you notice how the energy of the room shifts. Cleopatra leans in a fraction, her eyes catching the light from the oil lamps. She smiles faintly, as if to acknowledge that you've noticed the change, but says nothing. You suspect the music has shifted for a reason. The instruments themselves are as much part of the spectacle as the notes they play. Some are inlaid with mother of pearl, others bound in gold thread, each one a reminder of Egypt's reach and wealth. The musicians' hands move with fluid confidence, and you wonder how many years they've trained for this, not to perform for a crowd, but to influence the mood of a single room. Cleopatra reaches for the flute lying beside her and lifts it with a kind of reverence. She plays a brief phrase, low, winding, like a trail of smoke, and hands it back. It's not a display of virtuosity. It's a reminder that she can join the performance at will, that the music belongs to her as much as the walls and the air do. By the time the final note fades, the conversation has drifted into comfortable silence. You don't remember when the questions stopped or when the music began to slow, only that you feel slightly altered, less guarded, more attuned to her presence. The musicians bow their heads and slip away without a word, leaving only the faint echo of their work in the stillness. You realize as you follow her out into the corridor that she doesn't just use music to decorate a moment. She uses it to change the shape of the moment entirely. And once the shape changes, so do you. The corridor bends again, this time into a tall, arched space where sunlight filters through latticed stonework, scattering patterns across the floor. You can hear the faint murmur of the city outside, yet here inside, the air is cool, scented faintly with myrrh. A long curtain of fine linen sways in the breeze, revealing glimpses of the outer courtyard. Cleopatra steps toward it and pauses, drawing the fabric lightly over her shoulder so that the light catches on its folds. This is the art of veiling, an Egyptian specialty, elevated, in her hands, into something far beyond modesty or mystery. A veil here is not meant to conceal entirely, but to suggest. It's a flicker of promise, an invitation for the mind to imagine what the eye cannot fully see. Ancient depictions of Egyptian queens show them with translucent layers, light enough to reveal the curve of an arm, the tilt of a neck. For Cleopatra, the veil becomes both shield and lure. Historians still argue whether she introduced new fabrics from Greek and Eastern markets into the Egyptian style or merely adapted what was already fashionable. What is certain is that she understood the effect, how a veil's movement could draw the gaze more effectively than any static display. A quirky story from an Alexandrian courtier claims that Cleopatra once hosted an evening audience in a rooftop garden during a warm desert wind. She wore a veil so fine that the breeze lifted it in slow, deliberate waves, revealing and concealing her features over and over. The courtier swore the entire group seemed hypnotized, their conversations slowing as if caught in the rhythm of that shifting cloth. Whether embellished or not, you can see how easily such a moment could happen. She turns slightly now, letting the linen fall forward to hide part of her face, then lowers it just enough for her eyes to meet yours. The gesture is small, but it feels like a chosen gift, sight granted and withdrawn in the span of a breath. It is impossible not to follow the movement, to wonder what it hides and what it reveals. Around the room, stands of papyrus and lotus motifs are carved into the stone. The patterns themselves seem to echo the same interplay, visible yet partially obscured, repeating without quite revealing the whole design. Even the architecture is part of the lesson. What you glimpse is more powerful when it's not given all at once. She crosses the space slowly, the veil trailing behind her like a ribbon of cloud. You realize that veiling is not just about the fabric, it's about controlling the pace of revelation. In politics, in seduction, in negotiation, she never offers everything in the first moment. You must stay to see more. You must want to. Cleopatra begins to speak of the Roman habit of appearing bareheaded in public, contrasting it with Egyptian ceremony. She notes that what Rome sees as frankness can, in Egypt, read as carelessness after all. If a ruler gives away all mystery, what remains for people to imagine? Her tone is light, but you can feel the pointed edge beneath it. The light shifts as the afternoon deepens, and the veil's transparency changes with it. Now it seems thicker, almost opaque, until she steps closer to a patch of sun, and it turns sheer again. You wonder if she's positioned herself deliberately to catch this effect, though. With Cleopatra, you no longer believe in accident. She pauses near the archway, looking out toward the city. The veil stirs again, and for a moment the shapes beyond market rooftops, the far glint of the Nile, merge with her silhouette. The message is almost too subtle to name. She is part of this city, this river, this land, yet set apart from it, always seen, never fully possessed. When she finally lets the veil drop entirely, it is not to close the scene but to change it. You follow her into the next hallway, still carrying the after-image in your mind. And you realize the veil has done its real work, not in what it hid, but in what it left you imagining. The hall you step into opens suddenly into sunlight, and the smell of the river rushes over you, mud, lotus, and the faint tang of sailcloth. Below, the palace harbour bustles with servants carrying crates of figs, bolts of linen, and baskets of blue lotus flowers. But your eyes are drawn to the vessel moored at the water's edge, Cleopatra's barge, ready for a voyage that will become one of the most famous entrances in history. This is the journey to Tarsus, where she will meet Mark Antony. Ancient writers described it with the kind of breathless detail usually reserved for myth, and yet you are here as it is being prepared. The barge gleams with gilded fittings that catch the sun, its deck shaded by an awning of purple silk. The sails are unfurled, just enough for you to see their pale gold hue, but what matters is not their colour, it's their scent. She orders the sails soaked in a heady blend of rosewater, cinnamon, and the oil of blue lotus, so that the wind itself will carry her presence ahead of her. Whether the exact recipe was hers is something historians still argue over, but every account agrees. Those on the shore would smell her arrival before they saw her. A quirky palace rumour insists that this perfuming was so strong that birds followed the ship for miles, thinking it was some kind of floating garden. True or not, you can imagine the effect: an invisible hand reaching forward, stirring anticipation before the first glimpse of her face. As preparations continue, musicians climb aboard, carrying lyres, flutes, and small drums. They will play as the ship glides into view, their music drifting over the water to blend with the perfume. The barge is no mere transport. It is a moving stage, every detail set to shape the moment when Antony sees her. You step closer to the gangway, where a servant is polishing the carved prow, a lotus in full bloom, its petals painted in gold leaf. Even the oars are wrapped in strips of crimson cloth so they won't catch the sun too brightly, ensuring that the attention remains where she wants it, on her. Cleopatra herself appears in a gown of sheer linen layered over deeper blue silk, the colours shifting with the light. She wears a gold diadem shaped like the rearing cobra, Uraeus, symbol of divine authority. The breeze stirs the fabric just enough to suggest motion, even when she is still. She stands at the edge of the deck, gazing upriver, as if the horizon belongs to her alone. The harbour quiets without being told. The musicians play a brief phrase, warm, inviting, yet threaded with command, and the scent of the perfumed sails catches the wind. You can almost feel it wrap around you, pulling your senses forward. You imagine what it will be like for Antony in Tarsus. First, the faint fragrance carried on the breeze, then the sight of the gold-tipped sails, the music growing clearer with each stroke of the oars. By the time she reaches the shore, the scene will feel less like an arrival and more like an inevitability. As the barge pushes away from the dock, the reflection of its golden fittings dances on the water. You stand there, watching the wake spread across the Nile, and you realize the true genius of the moment. It's not just that she will arrive in splendor, it's that she will arrive already in the mind of the one she comes to meet. The image of the barge still lingers in your mind when you follow Cleopatra into a smaller chamber tucked behind the main audience hall. The air here is cooler, the light dimmer, and the sound softer, just the muted clink of ceramic cups and the low murmur of voices. This is her space for wine-laced diplomacy, where conversation flows as easily as the drink, and where a shared cup can tilt the balance of power. The table in the center is round, a deliberate choice. No guest sits at the head, and yet Cleopatra's place is unmistakable, marked by a simple gold cup that gleams in the lamplight. Around it, smaller cups of silver and bronze await the hands of those she has summoned. The wine is deep red, brought in from the vineyards along the Nile delta, its surface reflecting the flicker of oil lamps above. Historical accounts speak of her skill in using drink, not to cloud her mind, but to cloud the judgment of others. She was known to pace herself, sipping sparingly while her guests drained cup after cup. Whether she truly held her liquor flawlessly or whether her servants discreetly watered her wine is something historians still argue over, but the outcome is the same. She stayed sharp while her companions softened. A quirky tale survives from a Greek merchant who claimed to have been invited to such a gathering. He swore Cleopatra had a special amphora sealed for each guest, its stopper dipped in wax and scented with a drop of oil chosen for them alone. Breaking the seal was both a privilege and a subtle mark. It meant the wine was theirs, but also that its scent would follow them through the night, as if carrying her signature. You watch as she signals to a servant, who pours the first round. The wine is warm, spiced with cinnamon and a hint of pomegranate, the sweetness hiding its potency. The first sip is comforting, almost harmless, but the second carries a slow heat that seeps into your limbs. Cleopatra's gaze lingers just long enough for you to notice before she turns to another guest, drawing them into an easy exchange about the latest shipments from Cyprus. The rhythm of the room is carefully tuned. Laughter comes easily, voices overlap without tension, and the soft strum of a lyre in the corner keeps the pace unhurried. Yet beneath it, you sense a current, a subtle weaving of alliances, hints dropped and picked up, promises implied rather than spoken outright. You notice how she touches her cup lightly to another's before speaking of a trade concession, how she refills a diplomat's cup just as he hesitates over a decision. These are not accidents. Each pour, each pause, is as deliberate as the choice of words. The wine begins to work its slow magic on the room. Shoulders loosen, the edges of conversation blur, and people lean in without realizing it. Cleopatra, still poised and alert, lets her voice sink lower, drawing others to listen more closely. By the time the amphora is half empty, the atmosphere feels less like a meeting and more like a shared secret. You take another sip, feeling the warmth spread, and realize you've spoken more freely than you intended. Not dangerous words, but enough to reveal pieces of yourself you might have guarded in another setting. That, you understand now, is the true point of this gathering, to make the sharing of such details feel natural, even welcome. As the evening winds down, she lifts her cup for a final toast, not to agreements reached or deals struck, but to the sweetness of honest company. The words are simple, yet layered. You leave with the taste of wine still on your lips, carrying the memory of her smile, and perhaps, without realizing it, a seed planted in your mind that will grow long after you've gone. The warmth of the wine still lingers in your chest as Cleopatra leads you through a side gate into the palace gardens. The air shifts immediately cooler, fragrant, alive with the rustle of leaves and the soft splash of water. Moonlight falls in silver shards across winding paths bordered by flowering jasmine and clusters of hibiscus. The garden is enclosed on all sides, yet it feels vast, a green oasis that muffles the hum of Alexandria beyond its walls. This is one of her private audience gardens, a space designed for conversations too delicate for public halls and too charged for casual encounters. The ground is soft underfoot, laid with smooth river stones that crunch faintly when stepped on. Lanterns hang from fig trees, casting pools of golden light that leave deep pockets of shadow between them. You quickly realize that these shadows are not empty, they are the true architecture of the place, offering just enough concealment for whispered exchanges. Historical accounts describe how Cleopatra would invite certain guests to walk here after formal dinners, offering them air and calm before returning to negotiation. The effect was disarming. Without the grandeur of the throne room or the calculated intimacy of her private chambers, the conversation could unfold with a different kind of honesty. Whether she planned every turn in the path or simply knew how to use what the garden gave her is something historians still argue over. You follow her along a curved path that leads to a shallow pool lined with lotus blossoms. The water reflects both her face and the stars, making it hard to tell where the earth ends and the sky begins. A quirky tale survives among the palace staff of how Cleopatra once convinced a hesitant envoy to sign a treaty by arranging the discussion beside this very pool. She had servants quietly release oil onto the water's surface, so that the lantern light would ripple like liquid gold. The envoy, caught between her gaze and the shimmering reflection, agreed before the night was over. She slows her pace, letting the conversation wander. At first, she asks about your impressions of the feast, the music, the city's market stalls. But as you near a grove of pomegranate trees, her questions shift about alliances, resources, and the stability of your homeland. The change is subtle enough that you almost don't notice it until you hear yourself answering with more detail than you'd planned. The scents here are layered. Jasmine heavy in the air, the faint spice of night, blooming flowers, and the green freshness of the Nile's breeze drifting in from beyond the walls. Each inhale seems to loosen the mind a little, to slow your guard. Lantern light catches the gold thread woven into her gown, glinting faintly as she moves. At one point, she stops to pluck a single hibiscus blossom, holding it delicately by the stem. She turns it in her fingers as she speaks, and you can't help but follow the motion. Then, with a faint smile, she tucks it into your hand before moving on. It is a small gesture, but you know it will remain in your memory long after the words of this night fade. The path eventually loops back toward the palace, but she pauses at the final bend, where the wall is low enough to glimpse the dark outline of the Nile. The water seems to whisper in the distance. She lets the silence stretch, long enough for you to feel the weight of the moment. Then, without looking at you, she says something short, deliberate, that leaves no doubt she has been steering this conversation from the first step. By the time you re-enter the palace, the cool scent of the garden still clings to you. You know you've agreed to more than you realized, but you also know you would walk that path again if she asked. The garden's cool breath fades as you step into a broader hall lined with carved columns, each one painted in rich ochres and blues. The air is thicker here, carrying the faint scent of incense and river reeds. You follow Cleopatra into an open courtyard, its paving stones warm from the day's sun, though the night sky now hangs overhead like a deep indigo canopy. At the center, a tall brazier burns steadily, sending thin ribbons of fragrant smoke upward toward the stars. This is no ordinary gathering. Tonight, she will take her place in a sacred festival rite, one of the Nile's fertility celebrations, a blend of ceremony, spectacle, and political theatre. Such rituals are as old as the river's annual flood, honoring the gods who grant Egypt its life-giving waters. In these performances, the queen does not simply attend, she becomes a living embodiment of divine abundance. Historical records hint at her active participation in certain rites, where the ruler's presence was not merely symbolic, but essential to the performance. Whether her role was deeply religious or calculated for influence is something historians still argue over, but everyone agrees that the image of Cleopatra, in ceremonial dress, burned itself into the minds of her subjects. Attendants approach with garments reserved for such nights. A flowing linen robe woven with threads of gold, and a collar of turquoise and lapis that catches every flicker of firelight. A crown shaped like the solar disk of Hathor rests in their hands. When they place it upon her head, the transformation is instant. She is no longer simply the queen, but the goddess herself. A quirky account from a temple scribe claims that during one festival, Cleopatra arranged for baskets of lotus blossoms to be tossed from the balconies into the crowd, their petals soaked in scented oils so that the entire courtyard filled with fragrance as she entered. The scribe swore the petals clung to people's skin and clothing, carrying her presence with them long after the ceremony ended. The music begins, low and rhythmic, the steady pulse of frame drums joined by the shimmer of sistrums, those sacred rattles whose sound is meant to please the gods. Cleopatra steps into the open space beside the brazier, moving slowly, each gesture measured and deliberate. Her arms rise like the unfurling of papyrus leaves, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she is calling the river's blessing into the city. The crowd gathered along the edges is silent at first, their eyes following her every move. The light from the brazier turns the gold in her robe to molten fire, the blue stones at her collar to drops of night sky. The air seems to thicken with the scent of the incense, a blend of frankincense, myrrh, and the sweet resin of acacia. Her movements are not those of a temple dancer, yet they carry the same gravity. Each step aligns with the drumbeat, each turn catches the light in a new way. You realize that while the festival honors the gods, it also reinforces her place as their chosen vessel. Watching her, you can see why the line between ruler and deity was often blurred in the eyes of the people. As the music swells, attendants pour libations into the brazier, sending flares of golden sparks into the air. Cleopatra raises her hands in blessing, her voice carrying across the courtyard, speaking not to one person, but to all who can hear. You can't catch every word, but you feel the intent: prosperity, protection, continuity. The final moments are quiet. The drums fade, the crowd bows their heads, and the queen stands still in the smoke's last curl. Then she turns toward you, the faintest smile on her lips, as if to remind you that while the gods may have been watching, so was she, and that you have now seen her in a role few ever will. The courtyard's incense still clings faintly to your clothes, as Cleopatra guides you along a quieter corridor, its walls painted with scenes of scribes, couriers, and distant trade ships. The sound of your footsteps is softened by woven reed mats underfoot. At the far end, you enter a smaller, dimly lit chamber, where a low cedar table is set with scrolls, a bronze ink pot, and neat stacks of papyrus sheets. The air here is perfumed, but not by braziers or flowers. The scent comes from the scrolls themselves. She gestures toward one lying open on the table. The faint sheen on the edges tells you it's been treated with scented oil, subtle, not overwhelming, but enough that every time you unroll it, the fragrance rises. These are her scented scrolls, messages meant not just to be read, but to be experienced. Historical accounts note that Cleopatra was skilled in correspondence, often writing or dictating letters in her own voice, rather than leaving everything to scribes. In an age when messages traveled slowly, she understood that a letter could be more than words on papyrus. It could be a miniature encounter. Whether she was the first to perfume her letters, or whether she borrowed the idea from Eastern traders, is something historians still argue over. But the effect was unmistakable. You take one of the scrolls, noticing how the faint aroma of myrrh and crushed rose seems to cling to your fingers. The ink is a deep black, the handwriting precise and fluid. The message is diplomatic, an invitation for an envoy to return to Alexandria, but the scent turns it into something more intimate, as if the words themselves are leaning closer. A quirky court rumor tells of a time she sent such a letter to a Roman official with whom she was negotiating trade terms. When he unrolled it in a crowded forum, the perfume drifted through the air, and bystanders immediately began asking who had sent it. The official supposedly laughed, saying, "The scent answers your question before the words do." Cleopatra picks up another scroll and dips its edge into a small dish of oil infused with blue lotus. She lets it dry as she speaks, her tone casual but her eyes alert, as if weighing the impact of each phrase she dictates to a scribe nearby. You realize that every detail, from the choice of oil to the precise folding of the papyrus, is calculated to carry her presence across distance. She explains, almost idly, that certain scents are chosen for certain recipients: myrrh for loyalty, lotus for spiritual favor, cinnamon for warmth and alliance. You suspect this code is known only to her and a few trusted attendants, turning every letter into a kind of secret message that only the initiated can fully understand. The scribe seals a finished scroll with a lump of red wax, pressing it with a carved stamp bearing the image of a rearing cobra. The wax itself is faintly scented, ensuring that even the act of breaking the seal will release a trace of the queen's design. As you watch, it occurs to you that these scrolls are more than messages. They're portable stages, carrying a fragment of her court's atmosphere to far-off lands. A reader might open one in Rome, Thebes, or Antioch, and for a moment be transported to Alexandria, to the scent of her chambers, to the texture of her voice carried through written lines. Before you leave, she hands you a scroll of your own, sealed but unaddressed. The faint aroma of jasmine escapes even before you tuck it into your robe. You realize it doesn't matter what's written inside, it's already a memory, a token of a moment when the queen made her words into something you could hold, breathe, and keep. The chamber of scrolls fades behind you, as Cleopatra guides you into a smaller, darker hall, where the air is cooler and the shadows stretch long. The walls here are painted in deep ochre and black, the colors warmed by the flicker of low-oil lamps. In the center stands a carved pedestal on which rests an ornate bronze vessel shaped like a coiled serpent. Its lid is studded with small green stones that catch the light, like reptile eyes. This is the space where the serpent myth lives, a legend that has wound itself around Cleopatra's image almost as tightly as the creature on the vessel. The asp, the cobra, the uræus snakes in Egypt are not merely animals. They are divine symbols, protectors of kingship, bringers of both life and death. Cleopatra knows this power, and she knows how to let it coil into her legend. Historical accounts connect her to the serpent in more ways than one. Some link it to her death, others to her choice of crown, and still others to the stories of her keeping rare snakes within the palace. Whether she truly maintained a collection, or whether this was Roman propaganda meant to paint her as dangerously exotic, is something historians still argue over. What is certain is that she allowed the association to remain unchallenged. A quirky palace rumor claims that during one private banquet, she arranged for a trained serpent, its venom removed, to wind itself lazily around her arm as she spoke with a foreign emissary. The man, trying not to stare at the smooth, scaled coils, agreed to her trade terms within the hour. Whether it's true or embroidered with time, it's exactly the kind of spectacle you could imagine in this room. She moves toward the vessel and runs her hand along the bronze, her fingers tracing the serpent's curves as if reacquainting herself with an old companion. Then she lifts the lid, releasing a faint hiss, not of a creature, but of perfumed steam rising from within. It smells of cedar and frankincense, the scent curling upward like the serpent's own breath. In Egyptian symbolism, the cobra is Wadjet, the protector of Lower Egypt, the ever-watchful guardian who spits fire at the queen's enemies. Cleopatra wears that symbolism like another layer of skin. When she dons her crown with the rearing cobra at the front, it is not mere decoration, it is a silent warning. You can approach, but you cannot strike without risking the goddess's bite. She speaks softly, telling you how serpents are revered for their cycles of shedding and renewal, how they embody both beauty and danger. As she talks, the light catches on the green stones in the vessel, making them seem to blink slowly. You find yourself leaning in, as if the story has its own hypnotic pull. From the far side of the room, an attendant appears carrying a narrow basket woven of reed. Cleopatra lifts the lid just enough for you to see the smooth, sinuous movement inside. The snake is pale gold, its body coiling and uncoiling with effortless grace. She does not take it out. She doesn't have to. The glimpse alone is enough to send a ripple of tension through you. When she closes the lid again, she smiles faintly, as though she's made her point without uttering it. The serpent is not here to threaten you. It is here to remind you of where you stand. In this palace, in her presence, danger can be as quiet and beautiful as a sleeping snake. As you leave the room, the faint hiss of the steam and the glint of green stones linger in your mind. And you realize that the myth is more than a story, it's an ongoing performance, one that will follow her image into eternity, as inevitable as the serpent curling back into itself. The serpent chamber's cool shadow gives way to a long, sunlit gallery. Here, tall windows open onto the Nile, and a soft breeze stirs the gauzy curtains. Cleopatra walks ahead of you, her gown catching the light, and you realize this is not just a place for walking, it's a place for display. Lining the walls are tall cedar stands draped with rare fabrics and dyed garments, each one glowing with colors that seem to shift in the sun. This is where she keeps her collection of rare fabrics and dyes more than mere clothing. These are weapons of influence. In Egypt, textiles are both currency and statement. The dyes themselves are treasures, gathered from far-flung places, deep indigo from India, saffron gold from the Levant, and the fabled Tyrian purple from the Phoenician coast, made drop by painstaking drop from the glands of tiny sea snails. Historical accounts say Cleopatra's mastery of presentation often began here, in the selection of what she would wear for each meeting, each appearance. Historians still argue whether she personally dictated every color pairing or whether her attendants advised her, but the effect was always hers. A visiting envoy might see her in Nile green one day, a subtle echo of fertility and renewal, and in blazing crimson the next, a shade that signaled power and divine energy. A quirky palace story tells of how she once invited a Persian trader to view her dye workshop, only to have him leave empty-handed after being so captivated by her demonstration that he forgot to negotiate the price. The man reportedly told others that the queen's robes were more dangerous than her armies. She lifts a length of Tyrian purple silk from a stand and lets it spill over her arm. The color is almost impossible to describe, rich, deep, with a subtle sheen that seems alive in the light. She explains that this shade is reserved for moments when she must command attention without speaking, for in the ancient world, purple is not just a color, it is a proclamation. Another attendant brings forward a bolt of Egyptian linen, dyed in a pale gold hue that almost glows. Cleopatra runs her fingers along it as she tells you how this fabric catches torchlight during evening gatherings, making the wearer appear haloed in fire. You can imagine the effect, a queen bathed in gold while the rest of the room remains in shadow. The gallery itself is part of the performance. The fabrics are arranged by hue, flowing from deep, cool blues at one end to fiery reds at the other. As you walk, the shift in colors changes the feel of the space, calm at first, then warmer, more intense. It is like moving through moods made tangible. Cleopatra pauses before a display of white linen, the kind worn by priests in temple rituals. She tells you that white is the most deceptive of colors it can signal purity, humility, or absolute authority, depending on how it is worn and who wears it. She smiles faintly as she says this, as though she's reminding you that even simplicity can be a trap. The breeze stirs again, lifting the edges of the fabrics so they flutter like banners. She moves among them easily, pulling one forward to catch the light, letting another drift back into shadow. You realize she is showing you not just garments, but possibilities, each piece, a different story she might choose to tell. By the time you reach the far end of the gallery, the sun has shifted lower, turning the Tyrian purple into wine, the gold into amber, the blues into deep ocean. Cleopatra rests her hand on the final stand, a length of black silk that swallows the light. She says nothing about it, but you understand. Sometimes the most powerful statement is silence wrapped in shadow. The color-drenched gallery narrows into a short passage, lined with small niches, each holding an object wrapped in silk. When Cleopatra stops, an attendant steps forward to pull away the cloth from the nearest stand, revealing a small carved ivory box. Inside, on a bed of woven papyrus, lies something unexpected, a golden bracelet shaped like two clasped hands, each set with a tiny emerald. This is not merely jewelry. It is a gift of the flesh, as the court poets like to call it. In Cleopatra's world, gifts are currency, messages, and traps all at once. A present from her is never random, it is chosen to fit the recipient like a second skin. Historical accounts record her offering finely woven linen to priests, gold and lapis amulets to generals, and rare oils to visiting rulers. Whether these were acts of pure generosity or calculated moves in the larger game of influence is something historians still argue over, but the results speak for themselves. Few could resist reciprocating. She lifts the bracelet and lets it rest lightly in her palm. The weight seems deliberate, not heavy enough to burden, but substantial enough to remind the wearer of her hand in theirs. You realize that such a gift is both intimate and public. Worn in the right setting, it becomes a silent advertisement of her favor. A quirky palace anecdote drifts back to you. During a banquet, Cleopatra once presented a Roman envoy with a small alabaster jar of perfumed oil. Later, when he returned to Rome, the scent clung to his robes so strongly that his wife remarked on it before he could even unpack. The court gossips whispered about the queen's invisible touch for months. Here, in this chamber, attendants move quietly between displays, unveiling objects as if you were walking through a slow-moving dream. A string of pearls so large they look like drops of moonlight. A dagger inlaid with turquoise, its blade engraved with a blessing. A length of embroidered silk from far to the east, soft as breath against your skin. Each piece carries its own message, though none are spoken aloud. Cleopatra watches you as you move from one to the next. She explains in a low voice how some gifts are meant to bind in loyalty, others to unsettle, to make the receiver question why they were chosen. A gift, she says, can be remembered long after a promise is forgotten. The words settle in the air between you like a challenge. An attendant brings forward a small lacquered box. When she opens it, you see a ring carved from translucent carnelian, the stone catching the light like a drop of blood. She turns it slowly between her fingers before sliding it across the table toward you. It is not large, but its color is arresting, impossible to ignore. You sense that in accepting it, you also accept something unspoken. The room feels warmer now, not from the air but from the unshakable understanding that gifts in Cleopatra's hands are never free of meaning. They are anchors, set quietly in the currents of human connection, waiting to pull the receiver back toward her, no matter how far they drift. By the time you step back into the corridor, the weight of the ring still in your palm, you are aware that you carry more than gold or carnelian. You carry a piece of her choosing, and with it, the knowledge that she can reach you without ever taking another step. The gift chamber opens into a wide, sunlit room where polished marble meets cool shadows. Here, tall bronze mirrors stand along the walls, and between them are racks of garments, unlike any you've seen before, drapes and tunics that merge the clean, flowing lines of Greek fashion with the layered, symbolic designs of Egypt. Cleopatra steps inside with the ease of someone at home in more than one world. This is her mastery of foreign fashion fusion, a style that lets her shift identities as smoothly as changing a robe. Historical accounts agree she could dress as a Greek queen for one meeting, an Egyptian goddess for the next, and sometimes a deliberate blend of both enough to unsettle those who thought they knew her. Whether she herself designed these combinations or guided the artisans who made them is something historians still argue over. An attendant brings forward a gown of pale, almost white linen, cut in the long, elegant drape of a Greek chiton, but bound at the waist with a broad, beaded Egyptian belt. Cleopatra runs her fingers along the edge, the beads clinking softly, and explains how the combination signals both openness to foreign influence and unshakable ties to her homeland. A quirky palace rumor claims she once greeted a visiting Roman commander wearing a tunic in the style of his homeland, but embroidered with lotus blossoms and ankhs in gold thread. The man was said to be so distracted by the mixture of familiarity and strangeness that he agreed to her proposal without fully realizing it. Whether the story is exaggerated or not, you can imagine how such a calculated contrast could work. You move with her through the room, noting how each garment seems to speak a different language. A dark indigo robe edged with Egyptian hieroglyphs could pass for something from Athens if seen at a distance. A flowing white gown with Greek pleats hides the fact that its fabric is dyed with Nile-grown safflower, the scent of the river faint in its folds. The mirrors are positioned to catch the light differently depending on the wearer's stance. Cleopatra stands before one now, trying on a mantle woven in deep crimson, its edges finished in the green and gold patterns of temple art. In the glass, the two worlds meet at her shoulders, and you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. She speaks as she changes pieces, not hurriedly but with the rhythm of someone weaving a net. She tells you that clothing is not only about beauty, it's about language, without words, about setting the tone before the first sentence is spoken. You begin to understand how a gown could be as sharp as a blade, how the right fabric could soften an enemy or make an ally step more carefully. One garment in particular draws your attention. A robe of sheer linen over a layer of heavier Greek dyed wool, the combination giving depth to every movement. Cleopatra notes that this is for evenings when the conversation must feel both intimate and official. She smiles faintly, as though thinking of a night when it served exactly that purpose. By the time you reach the last rack, you see the range she commands not just in style, but in meaning. Each piece is a tool, ready to be worn into a meeting, a festival, or a quiet audience where the stakes are invisible to anyone but her. As you leave the room, the mingled scents of foreign dyes and Egyptian oils cling to you, and you realize that her clothing is more than attire. It's a statement of belonging everywhere, of being at home in both the familiar and the foreign. And that, perhaps, is her most disarming advantage of all. The fabric chamber fades into a cooler corridor, where the sound of water echoes faintly against stone. The air here is damp and fragrant, carrying the mineral tang of heated pools mixed with the sweetness of lotus oil. Cleopatra leads you through a carved archway into a chamber lit by low bronze lamps, their reflections trembling on the surface of a wide, steaming pool. This is the heart of her bathhouse diplomacy, a place where alliances can be forged in the haze of scented steam. The space is neither purely public nor purely private. It exists in that narrow space where formality can soften without entirely disappearing. Historical accounts suggest Cleopatra often received favored guests in such chambers, where the air itself encouraged slower speech and easier smiles. Some claim she used the bathhouse as a subtle testing ground, gauging how a person behaved when stripped of the heavy trappings of court. Whether this was an intentional political tool or simply the Queen's personal taste is something historians still argue over. A quirky story from an Alexandrian merchant tells of how she once invited a group of foreign envoys to share the bathhouse after a tense negotiation. The steam was infused with herbs meant to relax the body, and the wine served was warm and lightly spiced. By the time the bath ended, the envoys were laughing. Their earlier resistance softened like cloth in water. Within days, their signatures were on her treaty. The room itself is a work of art. Marble benches line the edges, their surfaces warm to the touch. Alcoves hold jars of perfumed oil, sponges, and folded linen towels so fine they almost float in the hand. A fountain shaped like a lotus sprays a thin arc of water into the pool, the sound steady and soothing. Cleopatra moves with ease here, speaking in a tone that matches the rhythm of the dripping water. She gestures for you to join her at the edge, where an attendant offers a shallow bronze basin filled with warm water and crushed mint leaves. The scent is fresh and sharp, cutting through the heavier perfumes. She talks about the city, about the latest ships to dock at the harbour, about the priests preparing for next month's festival. The conversation feels casual, but you begin to notice how she steers it, shifting from harmless topics to the edges of more important ones. The bathhouse provides cover for these transitions. People expect talk here to drift like steam, curling into unexpected places. The heat seeps into your skin, loosening the stiffness in your shoulders. You can see how a guest might, in this softened state, say more than they intended. Every movement in this space, the pouring of water over the hands, the passing of a towel, the offering of a cup of wine, becomes a moment to observe, to learn. An attendant approaches with a tray of oils, and Cleopatra selects one with the faint scent of cedar. She pours a drop into her palm, rubbing it slowly across her arm as she continues speaking, her gaze never breaking from yours. The gesture is unhurried, as though there is no urgency at all, yet you feel the pull to answer every question she asks. By the time you step back into the cooler corridor, the scents of mint and cedar cling to you, mingled with the memory of the warm water's embrace, and you understand the quiet genius of the bathhouse. It sends people away not just cleaner, but marked, their minds tied to the comfort they felt here, and to the one who offered it. The warmth of the bathhouse still lingers in your skin, as Cleopatra guides you into a smaller, low-lit chamber, where the air is thick with fragrance. Shelves of alabaster jars line the walls, each stoppered with wax and labelled in a delicate hand. This is her treasury of perfumed body oils, a place where scent is not merely adornment, but language. The room hums with the faint buzz of beeswax candles, their glow reflecting off the smooth, pale stone. The air is layered, sweet myrrh beneath a sharper thread of cinnamon, a trace of blue lotus hovering at the edges. Each jar, you're told, holds a carefully balanced blend, some for formal audiences, some for quiet evenings, others for moments meant to be unforgettable. Historical accounts agree Cleopatra's use of oils was a kind of code. Certain blends were linked to specific occasions or emotions. Whether this was a personal invention or an older Egyptian custom she perfected is something historians still argue over, but all agree she understood that scent could carry meaning long after words faded. She takes down a jar sealed with gold thread and opens it, letting the air between you fill with the scent of frankincense and crushed rose petals. It is rich without being heavy, the kind of aroma that clings subtly to skin and fabric, only revealing itself in close proximity. She dabs a trace on her wrist, then leans in slightly so you catch it on your next breath. A quirky palace rumor tells of a time when Cleopatra met with two rival envoys in separate meetings on the same day. She wore a different oil for each, chosen to evoke the mood she wanted them to carry away: warm, reassuring cinnamon for the ally she wished to steady, and sharp, almost citrus myrrh for the one she wanted to keep on edge. Later, the two men, meeting by chance, recognized the faint scents on each other's robes and immediately sensed they had been played. In the center of the room stands a low stone basin filled with water and floating lotus blossoms. Beside it, an attendant grinds fresh petals with oil in a small bronze mortar, the pestle moving in slow, rhythmic circles. The sound is soft but insistent, like a heartbeat under the silence. Cleopatra watches the process, then dips her fingers into the mixture and smooths it along the curve of her neck. She explains, in that measured way of hers, that scent has the power to dictate memory. When they smell it again, she says, whether in a market stall or in a dream, they will think of me. You realize it's not vanity, it's strategy. A fragrance can cross seas, outlast treaties, and haunt a person for years. She offers you a small vial, stoppered with carved wood. The oil inside is pale gold, the scent a mix of honeyed sandalwood and something you can't quite name. She tells you to unstopper it later, when you are far from this room. It will smell different then, she says, because you will be remembering. The attendant reseals the jars, their scents fading into the air until the room feels almost empty. But you know it's not. The oils have already marked you, as they have marked everyone who has passed through here. And perhaps that is the true message of this chamber. The body may leave, but the trace remains. The door from the oil chamber opens into a vaulted room, where the air trembles faintly with sound. At first, it's only a whisper like the hum of bees far away, but as you step inside, it swells into soft, deliberate notes. A cluster of chamber musicians sits in a half-circle near a carved cedar screen, each poised with an instrument. A slender reed flute, a lyre strung with gut and silver, a small hand drum shaped like a chalice, and a harp whose frame gleams with gold leaf. This is Cleopatra's inner circle of chamber musicians, the ones entrusted to frame her most private encounters. Historical accounts mention her careful selection of performers who could not only play with precision but also read the mood of a room and adapt instantly. Whether she trained them herself or drew from temple schools is something historians still argue over, but their skill is undeniable. You feel it in the way the music seems to breathe with you. The room itself is designed for sound. Domed ceilings carry each note so it lingers before fading, and the marble floor beneath the musicians reflects the tones upward like water catching light. Between songs, the silence is just as potent, wrapping around you in a way that feels intentional. A quirky palace anecdote says Cleopatra once asked her musicians to play a song composed to match the rhythm of a particular conversation. Supposedly, she and her guests spoke in measured turns, and the musicians followed their tempo exactly, speeding slightly when the discussion grew warm, slowing when the moment called for wait. The guest left convinced they had shared something profound, though he could not have explained why. Tonight, the musicians are playing something slow and winding, each note sliding into the next like silk over skin. Cleopatra steps forward and lifts the veil from a small table set with wine and fruit. She gestures for you to sit beside her, close enough that the music seems to rise from between you, rather than from across the room. She says little at first, letting the melody fill the air. The sound of the harp is warm, the flute cool and clear, the drums steady as a heartbeat. You realize they are not simply playing a song, they are setting a pace for thought, guiding when you speak and when you fall silent. When she does speak, it is in low tones that blend with the music so naturally you can't separate her voice from the instruments. She asks questions, but they feel less like inquiries and more like invitations to step further into the current. You answer without hesitation, as if the rhythm itself is carrying your words. One of the harpists leans forward, plucking a brighter phrase that seems to make the room subtly warmer. Cleopatra tilts her head at the change, smiling faintly, and shifts the topic to something more intimate, not confessions exactly, but stories that leave traces of understanding between you. You glance at the musicians and see that they are not watching their hands, they're watching her. Every change in her posture, every tilt of her gaze, sends a signal. They respond instantly, like an extension of her own thoughts. It occurs to you that this is the real art. The performance is not for you, but with you, drawing you deeper without you realizing how far you've gone. When the final notes fade, they don't end abruptly, they drift away like incense smoke, leaving only the faint echo in the dome above. You feel as though the room itself has exhaled. Cleopatra lets the silence hold for a few moments before speaking again, her voice softer now, almost conspiratorial. By the time you rise to leave, you are aware that you have been both an audience and a participant, drawn into a composition you didn't even know you were part of. And you suspect that when you recall this night, it won't be the exact words or gestures you remember first, it will be the music, threading through everything like a second heartbeat. The music's last echo still hums in your mind as Cleopatra leads you into a narrow chamber lit by the gleam of gold. Here, the air feels warmer, heavier, as if the very walls have been steeped in wealth. Tables of polished ebony display, trays of bracelets, necklaces, and amulets, each arranged with the precision of a scribe's ink lines. Yet these are not simply ornaments, they are messages you wear on your skin. Egyptian jewelry is never without meaning. Every stone, every metal, every symbol is a sentence in a language most guests only half understand. Historical records show Cleopatra using her adornments like statements, shifting the meaning depending on who saw her. Whether she personally designed these pieces or worked with master goldsmiths to create them is something historians still argue over. But the effect? Always deliberate. She steps toward a stand draped in deep blue cloth and lifts a collar necklace so wide it could almost be mistaken for armor. It's inlaid with lapis lazuli, turquoise and carnelian, each stone chosen for its symbolic weight: lapis for truth, turquoise for protection, carnelian for vitality. She tells you that when she wore this before a Roman delegation, she did so knowing they would recognize only its beauty, not the silent blessing she'd placed on herself. A quirky palace story claims that Cleopatra once sent a jewel to a general in the form of a scarab beetle, its eyes made of tiny emeralds. When he wore it into battle, he believed it would protect him, and he survived against staggering odds. Whether the story was truth or superstition didn't matter. What mattered was that the jewel tied his victory to her hand. She moves on to a smaller display. Rings carved from translucent stones, each engraved with symbols so fine they look like whispers caught in crystal. She points to one etched with a lotus bloom, explaining that such a piece could serve as a silent signal during a meeting, a subtle turn of the hand, and the message was sent without a word. The room glows under the lamplight, every gold surface catching fire in the flicker. Cleopatra slips a narrow band around her wrist gold, with the head of a cobra at each end. The gesture is slow, the clasp almost ceremonial. You can feel the air shift as she fastens it, as though the act has drawn a line you cannot cross. You realize that her jewelry is not decoration, it's a vocabulary. A sapphire drop could whisper favor. A golden falcon might warn of watchful eyes. A pair of anklets could speak of belonging to no one but herself. And if you don't know the language, you're already at a disadvantage. Before you leave, she presses a small pendant into your hand, a disc of polished electrum, warm from her palm. On one side, the faint outline of an ankh. On the other, the uraeus serpent. She doesn't explain it, only says, "Wear it when you need to be remembered." The metal is cool against your skin, but you know it will warm quickly, as if carrying a trace of her pulse. As you step back into the corridor, the weight of the pendant feels out of proportion to its size. It's not heavy with gold, it's heavy with intent, and you understand that this too is how she works. Every piece, every shimmer, is a message waiting to be read. The corridor turns sharply, leading you into a long, open loggia, where the air smells faintly of oil lamps and crushed petals. The marble floor is smooth underfoot, reflecting the glow of torches mounted on bronze stands. Beyond the colonnade, the night sky hangs like a sheet of black glass, the stars sharp and cold over Alexandria. But here, within the rhythm of the columns, the light is warm, and all eyes are drawn to a single figure moving through it. This is Cleopatra's domain during the midnight processions, ritual walks through the palace's upper galleries, performed for no formal reason, yet remembered by everyone who witnesses them. Historical accounts suggest that these processions were as much political theatre as personal indulgence. She never walked them at random. She chose her route, her companions, and even the timing of the torches to create a precise visual effect. Whether the exact hour was chosen for superstition or strategy is something historians still argue over. Tonight, she wears a robe of deep blue silk lined with gold thread, its hem just grazing the marble so it moves like liquid light with each step. A narrow diadem rests in her hair, catching the torchlight with each turn of her head. The air smells of blue lotus and warm sandalwood, the scent drifting behind her like a silent banner. A quirky palace anecdote claims that during one such walk, she timed her arrival at the northern gallery so that a fleet of merchant ships entering the harbour could see her silhouetted in the torchlight above. The sailors reportedly spoke of her for months afterward, calling her the Queen who walks the stars. You follow at a measured distance as she moves between the columns. The torches cast overlapping circles of light that seem to frame her at each step. Servants and guards line the edges, not stiff and formal, but poised, aware they are part of the scene. Every detail feels choreographed. The echo of her sandals, the pause at each archway, the way the wind lifts her robe just enough to ripple the gold lining. She does not speak much during these walks. Instead, she lets the space itself do the talking. At times she will glance toward the city below, her gaze lingering as though her thoughts are far away. At others she will meet the eyes of someone in her path and offer the faintest smile. It is impossible not to feel that each look means something specific, even if you can't quite read it. Halfway through the procession she slows, allowing the torches to burn lower. The dimmer light softens her outline, making her seem less a figure of flesh and more a vision moving through the air. You catch the faint sound of a lyre from somewhere deep in the palace, a single melody rising and falling like breath. By the time she reaches the final archway, the procession has shifted from spectacle to something closer to ceremony. The guards step back, the servants bow, and she disappears into the shadowed hall without a word. Yet the echo of her walk remains, the scent in the air, the memory of torchlight on silk, the way the marble floor seemed to hold her footsteps even after she was gone. The loggia's torchlight fades behind you as Cleopatra guides you through a narrow passage that opens suddenly into a high-vaulted chamber. The air here is cooler, almost reverent, and the floor is paved in smooth limestone worn by countless footsteps. Niches along the walls hold small altars, some to Isis, others to Bastet, still others to gods whose names are rarely spoken aloud. Between them are low tables covered in offerings, baskets of figs, bowls of honey, garlands of lotus and papyrus. But among these tributes are things more unusual. Tiny carved figurines of animals, their shapes both sacred and strangely intimate. This is the sanctuary of her sacred animal offerings, a place where devotion and desire intersect. The Egyptians have always believed animals to be vessels for divine power, but in Cleopatra's hands, these rituals become layered with personal and political intent. Historical records suggest she sometimes used these ceremonies as private audiences, allowing chosen guests to witness her in a role that merged queen, priestess, and woman. Whether every offering held personal meaning or some were staged for effect is something historians still argue over. She moves toward a low altar where the flicker of an oil lamp illuminates a small golden falcon. Beside it rests a dish of pomegranate seeds, their red glint vivid against the white limestone. She takes one in her fingers and places it in front of the figurine, her movements unhurried, almost meditative. A quirky temple tale claims Cleopatra once crafted an offering entirely from scented oils, shaping the liquid into a hardened resin figure of a black cat. During the festival of Bastet, she presented it at dawn, the heat of the rising sun releasing its perfume in slow, deliberate waves. Those who were there swore they could still smell it days later, as though the goddess herself lingered. Tonight, the offerings are both traditional and unusual. A carved ibis with inlaid lapis eyes receives a garland of fresh papyrus reeds. A small bronze crocodile is given a strip of linen soaked in cedar oil. The scents blend together, earthy, sweet, resinous, until the air feels thick enough to taste. Cleopatra beckons you closer to a table where an obsidian jackal rests on a pedestal. She places a drop of oil between its ears, explaining in a low voice that such an act invokes protection for the one making the offering. The way she looks at you as she says it leaves you wondering whether the blessing is meant for her, for you, or for both. The attendants in this room move with a deliberate quiet, their sandaled feet barely whispering against the stone. They replace spent oil lamps, adjust garlands, and bring forward small trays of offerings. Every movement feels rehearsed, as if the ritual has been played out countless times but never quite the same way twice. You realize that to witness this is to be drawn into a bond not with the gods alone but with the queen herself. She is showing you a version of her power that is not built on armies or gold, but on the ability to bridge mortal and divine. And in Egypt, that bridge is as strong as any fortress. When she finishes, the lamps are dimmed, and the last wisp of incense curls into the air. She turns without ceremony, leading you back toward the palace corridors. Yet the scent of the offerings clings to you, and you know it will follow you long after you've left this room. The hush of the offering chamber gives way to a more animated space as Cleopatra leads you into a long gallery lined with painted maps and carved reliefs of distant lands. The air is warmer here, carrying the mingled scents of spices, cinnamon, cardamom, clove drifting from open jars on low tables. Along the walls, guests lounge on cushions, some in Egyptian linen, others in foreign silks. Their conversations a quiet ripple of languages. This is where the tales of foreign emissaries are born, and where the queen learns exactly how her legend travels beyond the Nile. Historical accounts agree that Cleopatra cultivated relationships with visitors from every corner of the known world: merchants from Arabia, envoys from Nubia, scholars from Greece, and soldiers from Rome. Whether she invited them here for genuine exchange or to collect information for her own purposes is something historians still argue over. But there's no denying that in these gatherings, the line between truth and performance was always blurred. An attendant pours you a cup of cool, spiced wine, as Cleopatra introduces a weathered man draped in a richly dyed shawl. He claims to have sailed from the Red Sea to the markets of India, bringing with him stories of rare gems and stranger customs. His voice is low but carries the rhythm of someone who knows how to hold an audience. Cleopatra listens with the kind of attention that makes a man believe he is the only one speaking in the room. A quirky palace rumor says she once told an emissary from the far north a fantastical story about a mythical river that ran with gold. The man carried the tale home, embellishing it until his king sent ships south in search of it, ships that just happened to strengthen Egypt's trade routes along the way. Whether the story began with truth or invention mattered little. What mattered was that it moved people to act. Tonight, the stories flow like the wine. A Greek trader describes the marble quarries of Paros. A Nubian envoy tells of desert ceremonies beneath a moon so bright it turned the dunes silver. Cleopatra responds with her own tales, weaving in just enough detail to make you wonder how much is memory and how much is crafted for the moment. Her voice shifts with each listener, soft and measured for the scholar, quick and playful for the young envoy, steady and commanding for the seasoned general. The gallery is built for such exchanges. Alcoves along the walls offer small clusters of seating for quieter talk, while the open center allows for larger groups to gather. Overhead, latticed windows let in the faint night breeze, carrying the smell of the river through the mingled aromas of foreign spices. You find yourself drawn into a conversation about the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean. Cleopatra asks what you've seen there, and as you speak, she tilts her head, storing each detail. You realize that even as she listens, she is calculating, turning every word into a piece of her map of influence. When the gathering begins to fade, she stands at the center, offering a few parting words that seem casual, almost an afterthought. But later, you understand they were perfectly chosen, a phrase that would linger in the mind, shaping the way each guest would speak of her when they returned home. As you follow her out, you hear the low murmur of voices behind you. Already the stories are being told again, retold in new shapes and shades. And you know that by morning they will have traveled further than the sound of the river, carrying her image into places she has never set foot. The gallery's hum of conversation fades into the steady, rhythmic drip of water as Cleopatra guides you down a short marble stair. The air here is cooler, the torchlight reflecting off shelves of bronze and ceramic vessels. At the center of the chamber stands a long stone table, its surface scattered with cups and goblets of every shape, some delicate and thin-lipped, others heavy and wide-mouthed. This is her treasury of charmed goblets, each said to hold a story, a superstition, or a trap. Historical accounts mention her fascination with drinking vessels, not for their beauty alone, but for the power they could hold over a gathering. Some were shaped like lotus flowers, their wide rims forcing the drinker to lift the cup high, exposing their throat. Others had hidden compartments for herbs or powdered spices that would alter the wine's effect. Whether these were merely curiosities or tools for persuasion is something historians still argue over. She lifts one now, a slender goblet of beaten gold, its stem carved with a winding vine that ends in a tiny serpent's head. The inside is smooth, almost mirror-like, so that the drinker sees their own face shimmering in the wine. She tells you that in Egypt, such a reflection was thought to make the drink more potent, binding the image of the self to the act of consumption. A quirky palace story claims Cleopatra once used a goblet with a false bottom to serve watered wine to herself, while her guest drank the pure, stronger vintage. The evening ended with the guest flushed and unguarded, while she remained composed enough to strike an unexpected bargain. No one could prove the switch, but those who served that night swore the queen's cup weighed far less than it should have. She gestures to a silver cup inlaid with lapis, its handle shaped like a falcon in mid-flight. This, she explains, was a gift from a Syrian prince, said to bless the drinker with sharp vision in both day and night. Whether or not the blessing works is irrelevant, the belief in it makes the cup valuable. When it appears at the table, it changes how people sit, how they speak, how they watch one another. The table is a map of possibilities. Some goblets are etched with blessings to Isis, others with warnings against treachery. A few are plain but heavy, their weight alone suggesting they were made for moments when strength must be displayed rather than subtlety. Cleopatra selects a wide bronze cup, with a band of hieroglyphs running around its rim. She traces the symbols with one finger as she tells you they speak of renewal, a theme she uses when she wants her guests to leave thinking of fresh beginnings rather than past grievances. She pours a measure of pomegranate wine into it and offers it to you. The metal is warm from her touch, the scent rich and sharp. As you drink, the room feels smaller, more enclosed, not stifling but intimate, as if the act of sharing a cup has sealed an unspoken agreement. You begin to see how these goblets are more than tools. They're cues, silent actors in her theatre of persuasion. When you set the cup down, she replaces it carefully, as though returning a piece to its rightful place in a larger game. And you leave the chamber, knowing that from now on, every cup you see in her presence will carry a question. What does she want me to feel when I drink from this? The chamber of goblets opens into a quiet terrace where the night air is cooler and carries the scent of the river. Overhead, the sky is a deep, unbroken black scattered with sharp stars, and the moon hangs low like a polished disk of ivory. Low couches and carved wooden stools are arranged in a wide semicircle facing the horizon, as if the room itself has been built to watch the heavens. This is where Cleopatra holds her stargazing rites, ceremonies that weave astronomy, religion, and the subtler art of binding people to her through shared wonder. In Egypt, the stars are not just distant lights, they are markers of time, omens for harvests, and the eternal homes of the gods. Historical accounts note that Cleopatra was well versed in celestial lore, having studied with temple scholars and Greek astronomers alike. Whether her interest was born of devotion, strategy, or both is something historians still argue over. A servant approaches with a small bronze brazier, setting it on a low table. The coals glow faintly, their warmth mixing with the cool air. Beside it rests a shallow dish of honey cakes and a jug of date wine offerings, both for the guests and, symbolically, for the gods above. Cleopatra sits on the central couch, her robe draped in folds that catch the silver of the moonlight. A quirky palace tale says she once charted the exact moment a Roman general would step into Alexandria's harbour, timing her first meeting with him to coincide with a rare conjunction of Venus and Jupiter. The man supposedly left convinced their meeting had been fated by the heavens themselves. Whether or not the sky truly aligned that night hardly mattered. The belief was enough. She gestures toward a tall bronze stand on which rests a polished disk of obsidian, its surface reflecting both your face and the stars above. She explains that the disk is used to bring the sky down to the earth, allowing one to trace constellations as though they were painted just beyond reach. As she speaks, her hand brushes across the dark surface, and for a moment, her fingers seem to skim the stars themselves. The night is quiet except for the distant lap of the Nile against the docks. She begins pointing out constellations: Sa, the hunter; Sopdet, the bringer of the floods; the 7 stars of the bull's thigh, believed to guard the pharaohs. Her voice is low, unhurried, as though each name holds weight beyond its place in the sky. At intervals, she falls silent, letting the space between her words be filled by the slow drift of the stars. You realize the stillness is part of the rite, the feeling of being unmoored from time, of standing in a space where only the moment and the company matter. She leans toward you, her gaze shifting from the heavens to your face. "The sky remembers," she says softly, "even when men forget." It's unclear whether she means it as comfort or warning. The brazier's embers glow deeper as the night stretches on. When the rite ends, It is not with any declaration, but with the quiet pouring of wine into 2 cups, the liquid catching the starlight. You drink together without speaking, and in that silence, you feel the weight of the moment settle into your memory like something the sky itself might keep. The terrace's cool air follows you only a moment before Cleopatra guides you into a more enclosed corridor, its walls draped with heavy linen to muffle sound. Ahead, a pair of carved doors swing inward, revealing a chamber bathed in the muted glow of oil lamps. The light here is soft, almost reluctant, pooling on polished stone and catching on the faint shimmer of silk spread across a low couch. This is where her silken departures take place, the final, private encounters before she sends a guest, ally, or rival back into the world beyond her walls. There is no crowd here, no music beyond the faint hum of crickets from the garden, no audience but you and the Queen. Yet the room feels as orchestrated as any grand procession. Historical records speak of her skill in controlling the last impression, knowing that a parting can weigh heavier in memory than the meeting itself. Whether she perfected this through instinct or through deliberate practice is something historians still argue over. But all agree that she understood the importance of timing not just in what was said, but in how the moment ended. She moves with deliberate slowness now, her robe of pale linen trailing across the floor like water. The scent in the room is faint but unmistakable. Sandalwood, warmed by the heat of the lamps, touched with the sweetness of blue lotus. An attendant offers you a cup of cooled wine, but leaves as soon as it's in your hand. Cleopatra settles across from you, her posture relaxed, yet unshakably poised, and begins to speak. Her words are lighter than before, questions about your journey home, the weather on the road, the festivals you might see along the way. But beneath the softness, there's an undercurrent, as if she's leaving threads for you to pick up later. You sense that even in this farewell, she's setting the stage for your return. A quirky palace anecdote claims that once, during such a parting, she handed a departing ambassador a folded piece of silk, saying only, "For the journey." Inside was a small sachet of her personal perfume. The man supposedly kept it sealed for years, opening it only during times of political doubt, convinced it would remind him where to steer his heart. Whether this was truth or embroidered court gossip, it speaks to her understanding of how the smallest gift can anchor loyalty. She rises and crosses the room to a carved chest. From within, she draws a length of silk the color of deep twilight. Without a word, she folds it into your hands. The fabric is impossibly soft, the kind that will still carry her scent days from now. She does not explain its meaning. Perhaps it's a token, perhaps a message, perhaps both. As you prepare to leave, she walks with you to the threshold. The lamplight follows her, catching in her eyes, in the faint curve of her smile. She does not speak again, and somehow the silence feels heavier than words. You step into the corridor, and the door closes behind you without a sound. It is only then that you realize she has shaped the memory of this night, so that it will linger not in the moment of meeting, but in the moment of leaving. And in that sense, you haven't truly departed at all. The corridor beyond the silken chamber winds toward a quieter part of the palace, where the air is cooler and the light from the oil lamps softens to an amber haze. The sound of the Nile drifts faintly through open lattice windows, a slow, measured lap of water against the stone quay below. Cleopatra walks ahead, her steps unhurried, leading you into a room unlike any you have seen before. Here, the walls are covered in deep blue plaster flecked with gold leaf, as if the night sky itself has been drawn indoors. Low tables hold small censers of smoking resin, the air carrying the intertwined scents of myrrh, cinnamon, and something sharper, perhaps crushed mint. In the center of the room stands a couch draped in white linen, its edges embroidered with golden serpents. A single bronze lamp burns at its head, casting a soft halo over the fabric. This, you sense, is the space of her last perfumed breath, the moments she reserves for the closest confidants, the final private audiences before they leave her court for good, or before she departs on her own journeys. Historical accounts note that Cleopatra was a master at crafting farewells that felt both intimate and monumental, ensuring that whoever left her presence carried the impression of being singularly valued. Whether this was genuine sentiment or a final, calculated gesture is something historians still argue over. She gestures for you to sit opposite her. The lamp's light is so gentle that her features appear almost softened, the sharp lines blurred into something dreamlike. An attendant kneels to place a small alabaster bowl between you, its surface glistening with oil infused with crushed rose and blue lotus. Cleopatra dips her fingertips into the bowl, then lifts them to her temples, breathing in the fragrance as if sealing it into memory. A quirky palace story tells of how, during one such parting, she anointed the wrists of a departing ally with a rare Syrian oil, telling him it was, "So you will carry the Nile on your pulse." The man reportedly wore the scent for weeks, refusing to wash it away until his servants begged him to. Whether true or not, it captures the essence of this moment, a farewell that is meant to linger. Tonight, she takes your hand, turning it palm up. With deliberate care, she brushes the perfumed oil across your skin. The warmth of her touch blends with the warmth of the oil, and the scent rises not overwhelming, but steady, as though it will stay with you long after you've gone. She says nothing for several breaths, letting the silence fill with the rhythm of the river outside. When she finally speaks, her voice is low, almost weightless. She tells you to remember the feel of this room, the sound of the water, the scent on your hand. Memories fade, she says, but what touches the senses can live forever. It is not a command, not quite a blessing, something in between. The lamp's flame trembles once in the still air, then steadies. She releases your hand, and the faint trace of oil glistens on your skin. You realize this is the end not of your time in the palace, but of this carefully woven journey she has taken you through, each moment leading to this final, scented seal. You rise, and she remains seated, her eyes following you as you step back into the corridor. The last thing you carry with you is not her voice or her gaze, but the fragrance on your skin, sweet, warm, and unshakable. And now, my friend, as the night in Alexandria settles fully over the river and the palace sinks into silence, your footsteps slow. You carry the threads of every room you've passed through, the scent of lotus on the sails, the shimmer of Tyrian silk, the weight of a gold pendant still warm from her palm. The moon drifts higher over the Nile, softening the edges of the city, and the torches along the harbour burn lower, their reflections bending in the water. You think of how the spaces you saw were not random, how each corridor, each chamber, each carefully chosen moment was a step in a longer pattern. Cleopatra's genius was never just in her beauty, nor only in her politics, but in the way she bound those two together with the senses. Sight, sound, scent, touch, each offered to you like a gift, each leaving its mark. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint sweetness of the gardens through the open windows. Somewhere in the distance, a musician plucks a final note on a lyre, and the sound seems to dissolve into the night. You breathe slowly, feeling the weight of the palace slipping away, replaced by the softer weight of memory. Outside the palace walls, Alexandria is quiet, save for the occasional creak of a ship at anchor. You can almost imagine the perfumed sails on the barge again, catching the wind. The scent on your hand lingers, subtle but insistent, like a reminder you can't put into words. And as you close your eyes, letting the stillness settle around you, you realize that this journey, this weaving of sensation and story, was never meant to end at the gates. It will travel with you, carried in your breath, your skin, and somewhere deeper, where time cannot touch it.